Finalists will be receiving the awards at the awarding ceremony. So after we announce the grand finals, even if you do not advance, please stay and watch the grand finals with all of us. And then please receive the award at the awarding ceremony. Is Team Excalibur. In the round between Team Swagger versus the Legend. The team that will be advancing to the grand finals is Team The Legend. Can I have two representatives from Excalibur and The Legend up front, please? And of course, the grand finals is a prepared round, so we will start without any preparation time. And as we all know, the motion for the grand finals is this House believes that countries with higher rate of female education should be prioritized in receiving international development aid. Having said that, now we will start the grand finals. I now turn the microphone to our chair.
Today we have the motion. This House believes that countries with higher rate of female education should be prioritized in receiving international development aid. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister to the podium.
Mr. Speaker, it is a great honor to be standing here at the grand finals in what is arguably the most prestigious debate tournament in Korea. And we on-site government are more than happy to support the proposal before this House. Well, our team believes that the international community needs to focus on empowering women in order to break the vicious cycle of poverty. That empowering women is a key to proper development, and foreign aid directed towards empowering women actively alleviates poverty. Well, we on-site government will prove that why it is necessary to prioritize higher rates of female education and why nations should accord more development aid to impoverished countries that invest more on female education. So our model is very clear. Firstly, we define this House as countries and international organizations that currently provide development aid. So this includes countries like the US, but also the IOs such as the World Bank on other international development institutions. But secondly, when we say prioritization, it doesn't mean that higher rates of female education will be the only factor or standard of evaluating qualification for aid. Along with other standards such as transparency, aid effectiveness, we are additionally making female education another important standard, but probably one of the most important standards to consider when providing future aid. So lastly, by higher rates of female education, we mean the more a poor country independently strives to improve women's rates of education, the more aid will be allocated towards them. So first, going on to my first argument. So how does empowering women become a key to combating poverty? What we tell you, Mr. Speaker and Madam Speakers, is that many of the poverty-stricken regions share a common problem of embracing the culture of hatred for women. Let it be from southern regions of India, western regions of China, and almost all of sub-Saharan Africa. Through culture and tradition and religion, women have been subjugated and oppressed, Madam and Mr. Speakers. Not only is this a big cause of poverty, but we believe that solving this problem education can actually alleviate poverty in 5 ways. The first is that educated women can actively participate in the job market, making full use of nation's human resources. When women are educated, they can become active members of the workforce rather than being stuck at home and just being incapable of working. By utilizing the other half of the nation's population, the nation is capable of pushing its economy further up. Countries like Nigeria, which has conducted a massive program to enroll girls in public schools with the cooperation and funding from the Millennium Development Goals, which are called MDG. Initiative with UN bodies has seen to 20 to 50% increases in female enrollment. Along with this program, we see that the nation's GDP has also been in a steady rise in the past 5 years, according to the MDG reports. As such, by simply tapping into the human resource pool of the other half of the population, a country is very capable of pulling itself out of poverty. The second thing is that the higher levels of female education helps contribute to lower birth rates, and therefore resolves the pressure of lack of of resources. All of the poorest countries share a unique problem of overpopulation, where paradoxically the poorest families of these poorest regions have the most children. Famous economists and development specialists such as Jeffrey Sachs and Amartya Sen have noted that one of the biggest reasons why poor families are pushed to stay poor is because many poor families that cannot sustain itself cannot expect to accumulate savings if they have 9 months to feed. The reason for this abnormal phenomenon is due to the fact that women in these cultures are treated like human incubators and are thought to be only useful to have children. Girls and women in general are raised and taught this way by the community, while not having any form of official education to teach them of their rights and their potential abilities, Madam and Mr. Speaker. But as the UNICEF noted, when female students are educated, because they later work in the economy and because they have more understanding of their own rights, they have a strong tendency to have less children, which helps alleviate the overcrowding of resources. Thirdly, Mr. and Madam Speaker, more educated females within the population also increases the likelihood of more prudence and management within the household. Because many females are also primarily responsible for managing household finances, the World Bank has implemented microfinancing programs in countries like India, in which they provide more favorable terms to women who borrow money because of the very fact that they are more prudent. We think that educated women is also beneficial in the sense that households will be able to make more savings when women are better educated, contributing to poverty reduction. So the first thing we like to say is that educated women will have more job options, hence not forced into prostitution that spreads STDs. Uneducated women are relegated to either two jobs. First of all, the domestic labor or prostitution. Due to this fact, most of these impoverished nations have a huge number of females that are forced into prostitution when the family needs money, Mr. and Madam Speaker. And as a result, attribute to the high levels of STDs in the nation. STDs, such as AIDS, have been stated by the HWO to be the one of the leading causes, along with civil wars, that pushes the life expectancy of young adults down to the age of 30, which actually hampers long-term development because productive workers die at such an early age. An educated girl, on the other hand, can fulfill more jobs that don't expose her to spread STDs, but also to earn more for her family and also for herself. Hence, we say that finally, the fifth point. An educated female mother is also more likely to acknowledge the importance of education and send their children to school when they become mothers themselves, which also strengthens the benefits of the four benefits I have just mentioned before. Hence, we say that increasing female enrollment within schools is not just a matter of human rights, but we say that it is a matter of effectively reducing poverty, as women are the key and the solution of solving many problems of poverty. In conclusion, when donor doctors and international organizations prioritize the standard of higher female education, recipient nations will have the natural incentive to invest more in female education in order to obtain more aid, Mr. and Madam Speaker. Therefore, we are proud to propose.
Now I'd like to welcome the Leader of Opposition to the podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the policy provided by the team proposition in today's debate is totally useless. It will not make the changes that they want to promote in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. In other words, their policy is not only ineffective, it will cause more problems. So let me prove to you through first talking about the rebuttals and what they basically told us. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the current status quo, what's happening in a lot of nations like Sub-Saharan Africa, these nations, they think that sending women to to schools is a religious sin. That's what they think. It's ingrained to their culture. It's ingrained to their society's rules, ladies and gentlemen. So that is what has been happening for 1,000 years. They have not changed the social rule for a very long period of time. And do you think that this little money, this penny that they're giving to these developing nations will be enough incentive to change their 1,000 years of social rule? No, we believe not. It is not enough incentive for them to actually change these society's rules and all of these kinds of social infrastructure that they have already, ladies and gentlemen. Also, the second reason why their policy will not work is because of the fact that men will not easily give up their prestigious and all these advantages and benefits they already had in the status quo.
Sir?
These people already had these kinds of existing benefits as men who had authority, who had pride, who are superior than women. And would these people actually willingly try to change society's rules for the benefit of the woman? No, we believe not. As a matter of fact, they will say that what did you learn in school? That doesn't make any sense. It's against our rule. That is what they will say, ladies and gentlemen. That is why even if if the women learn about these kinds of things, even if they learn like in school that they have these kinds of rights, this will never work because the existing social pressure that men will have to the woman saying that it is wrong. It is basically wrong and it doesn't make sense. The school is teaching you a wrong thing. So ladies and gentlemen, what will basically happen is that what the family and the society teaches the woman and what the school teaches the woman will basically clash. And even if the woman try to voice out their opinion, it will not be enough to actually persuade men somehow and try to change and make a positive change in our society. So that's the reason why we believe that their policy will never work in the status quo. So what we think is that actually development aid should not only be limited and should be actually be limited by some kind of actors like the international society, but rather leave it up to nations and also the fact that we believe that their policy will not work. So today we have three arguments. Number one, pursuit of benefit. Number two, how it worsens the status quo. And the second speaker will talk about prioritization of standards. So in the first argument, we tell you that every nation actually has the right to pursue their own benefit. Nations have the right to invest money on the nation as they want to do so, with their own standards as they want. It is them who are giving them the money, right? So basically they have the right to pursue their benefit. So by giving them money, by investing money to these kinds of people, they actually try to promote their own national benefit. That's what they really do by trying to aid these nations.
Sir.
So we believe that they have the right to prioritize it. Therefore, that is wrong. It's because they have the right to do what they think is right for their own national benefit. But not only that, we tell you that it will become worse in the second argument. We tell you that China or Russia, these nations actually use aid as a method of rather international influence because they want to gain more profit from the international society and get these kinds of trust and also gain more justification in their own actions. But B, they gain resources. By intervening in the nation, by giving the aid, they have more justification to intervene in the country's kinds of industry and therefore these kinds of nations and companies are able to change the structure in that inner society. So, ladies and gentlemen, China is a nation, or Russia, these kinds of nations, do not really care about international regulations. They do not care about these kinds of human rights that they have in our society. As a matter of fact, China is very notorious for trying to infringe upon human rights of their own citizens. That's what's happening in the status quo, sadly. They themselves said that China is one of these nations who do not care about women's rights in their speech, ladies and gentlemen. So what will happen if we basically try to give aid to these nations? Even if their policy is implemented, China will, and developing countries can get money from nations like China at the back of the international society stage. Because if they want aid, but they will not be able to get aid because of this strict standard called woman education. So basically what we believe will happen is that they will try to get help from the nations like China and Russia, who's out of the international society's regulation and influence, and try to get it at the back of the international stage where no one will know it. And it will become like this. So we believe that what basically happens is that China and Russia has more incentive to intervene in the nation's industry, therefore making the whole society and the whole country itself where they're investing to become a place where China industry dominates. And what is the problem with China industry dominating the whole place? We told you how China is a nation that does not care about human rights, especially when it comes to women. So basically what happens is that by us implementing this policy, by the developing nations trying to get aid from China and Russia, not the legitimate way, then basically what happens is China industry intervenes there, basically causing more problems. So the Chinese industry will build factories that are not appropriate for women, that does not cope with the international standards of human rights. They will actually try to infringe upon the human rights and the woman's right that they so care about regarding our society. So basically what we believe will happen is a drawback. How? Because these kinds of corporations will actually not cope with the international society's kind of standards regarding women's rights, human rights. So basically that is a huge drawback. So we believe that leaving up to the status quo, leaving up to the people to make the choice will be a better thing. It will be more beneficial if we care about women's rights, because it's obvious that these people and these kinds of companies will try to change the industry by trying to regulate and try to not cope with the international standards of human rights. So basically what I've told you in today's debate is first the fact that all nations have the right to actually pursue their own benefit in terms of trying to invest on the other nations by the form of international aid. Also, we told you how China and Russia do this all the time. I mean, they try to invest on other nations, get profit from it. And secondly, we told you how it will actually be worse because the China and Russian industry trying to intervene in that situation will cause additional harms, what we call human rights infringement and women's rights infringement, which is not what they want. They care about women's rights, ladies and gentlemen. They say that they want to bring the benefits to the woman. But we believe that if they really care about women, if they know the reality and the status quo, what's happening regarding international aid, they will not try to propose this policy because we told you that there are drawbacks, that it will worsen the status quo. That's why we're proud to oppose. Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to the podium.
Mr. Madam Speaker, as the second speaker of the government bench, I want to look into 2 points of extensions. First, how our policy eradicates gender stereotype within the poor countries, and second, why our policy is absolutely necessary in the moral context of development aid. So before going on, we have few rebuttals to rebut the previous speaker. So first of all, what they talked about was the man's authority. That man is good at it. Men have the basic education and woman is not the one. So they don't really necessarily need our policy. However, ladies and gentlemen, why we are providing this policy in our side is because woman is exceptional in these cases of poor countries because they are exception in the education system. That's why we are providing this development aid to the poor countries so that they can develop women's education. And that's why, and they misunderstand our point. And our second rebuttal is about we want to talk about one fact that was misunderstood by the previous speaker. So ladies and gentlemen, first world countries, which is really rich countries, poured $4 trillion for 50 years to the poor countries. But nothing has changed, ladies and gentlemen. What this shows and why we got from this example is that we can understand that education needs to be basis and there needs to be a new solution under this problem because for 50 years nothing has changed about the poor countries even though we poured lots of money and development aid to those countries. So what we need is we need education basis system so that they can develop. As our first speaker mentioned about, we can get out of the problems such as poverty and overpopulation, which is really serious. And they never engage in that point about the problem that we can solve the poverty and the overpopulation. So we want them to engage in that point. And furthermore, they talked about the China and on Russia, which was extremely most of their arguments. So ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 points to mention. First of all, our policy will still be practical, and it is practical because, ladies and gentlemen, when we were doing developing aid in the status quo, and when we suddenly sanctioned them and we suddenly stopped the aid, it is influential, ladies and gentlemen. Poor countries can get influenced by when we suddenly stop the aid. So we believe that when we have those conditional development aid, we believe that our policy is going to work, and that is why aid is used, because aid is effectively high proportion to the poor countries, and we believe that can work in the status quo. And second point that we want to mention about the China point that they mentioned was about the international organization, which was mentioned in our model. So ladies and gentlemen, what we basically talked about was that international organizations has much more money. And World Bank, the purpose of World Bank is because they want to help poor countries, and in order to serve the purpose as a World Bank, that is why they are having more development aid than China or Russia, ladies and gentlemen. So extremely more money that can be invested in poor countries is the international organization, World Bank, not China or Russia in this debate. And we want them to engage in our first 2 arguments, which was very important in the context of debate. So going over to our last argument. So firstly, how does our policy eradicate gender stereotype within these societies? So as our first speaker has clearly said, providing women with educational opportunity leads to economic empowerment. And we would say further, economic empowerment also leads to a better social participation and real proof that these women are actually productive and active member of society that contributes. And this is the biggest source of how change the perception towards women can happen internally within the society. And they rebutted that our policy is impractical, so this shows how it is practical. The biggest source is to change the perception within the poor countries, ladies and gentlemen. That's the policy of our policy, and that's what we're going to achieve. It is for this reason that South Korea, that used to be an extreme confusion based on those patriarchal society, became more open-minded toward women because we were able to send a lot of girls to schools and see that they were not only equal with men, but they had same authority with the men, ladies and gentlemen. But at that time, even more productive girls, even they was known to be more productive than the men, Mr. and Madam Speaker. Hence, we also think that our policy actually enhances women's status in society by getting rid of the gender stereotype. And so too, why is it moral imperative for societies that enjoy gender equality to promote our policy? So it's basically talking about how our policy is necessary and needed in this society. Most, if not all, entities that give out aids are developed nations, ladies and gentlemen. that have not only the economic capacity to give out aid, but also sophisticated and mature civil societies. These societies cherish and also benefit from a gender-equal society, and as a result can attribute their prosperity and morality upon such values. Is it then the moral imperative for these nations to put efforts to not only promote such values within their societies, but also spread such principles and values to other regions that do not enjoy such justice, ladies and gentlemen? So, considering that many countries that are poor and are also countries with the worst women's rights record, it would be almost criminal negligence for aid-giving nations to bypass an opportunity to utilize their influence over aid-receiving countries to further enhance their women's rights status. Most of these countries are reluctant to put a priority on women's education due to cultural and traditional practices. It is therefore necessary for an outward force to be exerted to encourage these countries to care for the women's and girls' education. And lastly, we want to talk about the education needs to be basis when we are helping the poor countries. Because, ladies and gentlemen, even though there are thousands of highways and infrastructures in that poor countries, and even though because they are valuing the lots of priorities, when there are lots of highways, people cannot read the direction, ladies and gentlemen. That's the basic problem in the poor countries. We need to solve that problem by giving the education, especially the women's education, and that is why we are giving the conditional development aid as a proposition team stated. So thank you for listening. I'm proud to propose.
Now I'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition to the podium.
So, Mr. and Madam Adjudicators, today as the Deputy Leader of Opposition, I have a couple of questions to ask the government team. First, why do they think that female education is the best method to improve the economic status and the development of these countries? We think that if economic development is your problem, we should give money so that they can use it for infrastructure. We don't see how they can force these developing countries to use it for women's education. Second, why do they believe that these countries will follow their conditions of using it for female education? Why do they think that these countries will use it for female education? Why do they think that because they have this policy, countries will all of a sudden have a competition to have more female education? We do not see any logical link between their policy and this point. And we think the fact that as we have already told you in the Leader of Opposition speech, about how discrimination against women in these societies, especially in developing societies where they have restrictions against women, is ingrained in their culture, ingrained in their government, is ingrained in their history for thousands of years. We do not think that giving money, just physical incentive will be enough to change the perception of these governments. And we believe that their policy does not work if they cannot change the society's perception of women, which they do not. And so, going on to my first point of rebuttal. Okay, why do they believe that this policy will be able to send women to school, will be able to promote women's rights? First, we think that this will actually cause more oppression to women. Why? Because, for example, let's say you're living in Africa, you're an African girl, and you go to school and you learn that you have freedom. And so you come home and you tell your dad that I have freedom. Do you really think that when it is so ingrained in your culture that women is oppressed, women is stupid, women is useless, your father would like you going to school? No, we don't believe so. We think that this will actually be more counterproductive. It will actually cause the society to restrict women from going to more school. It is going to be seen as a spread of Western ideology by these Western countries using their overall financial capability to propaganda the women. We don't think this is going to be a very efficient or a very efficient policy when it comes to the fact that they still do not change the culture. And so we think that if you really want women's ideology, women's freedom, and women's rights, we think that your right solution to this problem should be to change the culture, which they do not with their policy, because what they are doing is they're simply throwing out money. They really haven't proved to us why these countries would give up their social norm for this fiscal benefit. And second, we also think that it will actually worsen the rights for women. For example, we think that the social norms, because social norms rules in this society, mostly because in developing countries where women's oppression is directly linked to social norms such as religion, often these governments are also based upon these religions. Often these governments are also based upon these ideologies. And so we do not think that these governments will give up their ideologies for a financial benefit. And we think that if they can
cannot prove that these countries will actually accept these models, accept to have greater female education just for the sake of development aid, while giving up the 1,000-year ideology that has been ingrained into their culture, as their leader of opposition has already told you, their policy fails to provide a solvency for their problem. And so this could actually cause more oppression, as we have stated. It can cause more physical abuse to these women because it could be seen as them like being spread as Western ideology, and it could cause great opposition from society and from their family because their social norms still existing. And second, going on to the point about the economic development and how like girls' education will actually increase the economy. However, we think that actually economic development is the priority, not girls' education, because if you have good economy, if you have a better economic development, then naturally the women's rights, the view of society upon these minorities is going to be improved. Also, the fact that if you are putting money into the girls' education, where are you going to get the money for infrastructure? You cannot improve the economy without infrastructure, ladies and gentlemen. And we see that because they are forcing these governments to use money for girls' education, we will have less money being put into the economy, less development. And going on to the fact that also that why will this not help the countries that you are forcing upon the development aid to? First, we think that these countries know the best about what is good for their government. We see this in cases such as in IMF in South Korea. IMF did not know what was the priority for South Korean government. They just said exports, decrease your companies. However, we didn't think that this was the best policy for our economy today, because outside help is outside help, and that is their limit. They cannot understand what is crucial for these governments. If these governments think water is a priority, they should be able to invest in that rather than education of women. And so going on to my last argument about how I'm going to show you that even based on the government's framework, why they still lose today's debate. Okay, so even if we take this debate into a debate under like a merit of value and principle, the proposition still fails because they're ignorant about how developing countries works. Every country has their different conditions and different needs, and some development countries might have a serious problem with, say, spread of diseases or such as malaria, and countries might be suffering from an infrastructure deficiency, and forcing these countries to prioritize public education for girls unconditionally without regards to these needs is stupid as well as cruel. And second point, the fact that there is no internal source of revenue for these countries because there are no jobs for people. And because people have no jobs, there is no source of taxation. And then because there's no source of tax, the government cannot use this to create infrastructure, such as roads and waterworks and power plants. And because there's no infrastructure, the economy cannot develop and hence cannot create jobs. And so this is called a vicious cycle of poverty, and because this is the only way that the country can break off this cycle is through an injection of money from an outside source. This source is development aid. Now the problem is that while these countries are still in desperate need of aid, they can't use this aid to actually develop or fix the country's problems because some ignorant first world policymaker thought that women's rights and education was the most important thing in the world. So instead of giving these monies to developing nations so that they can push their way through poverty and start developing, these poor countries are instead stuck in a paradox where they need to fix their problems to get money, but can only use that money on things that are irrelevant to their problems. And so what do we see today? We first see that the proposition side are not really solving the problem that they are identifying, because they cannot prove to us why they are going to solve this ingrained ideology of oppression against women with their policy of financial incentives. And we also think that these countries know what is best for them, know what is best for the development, and if you really are going for the development of developing countries, then you should stand for the opposition. Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome the government whip to the podium.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have to think in common sense, Jim. So the opposition team, the government team was actually questioning our feasibility in today's debate because of the strong social norm that is existing in these countries. However, we say that the first priority, the innate priority of these people is to survive, and in order to survive, they need money and they need food, ladies and gentlemen. That's why in order for these countries to survive, they cannot survive without aid in the current status quo. Because that's why they cannot help but get the higher rate of the female education in order to receive this development aid, and that's why our policy is going to work in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. And as the government whip of this debate, I've organized this debate into three clashes. And the first clash is about why they should and they will provide aid. So the opposition have been talking about the only reason why these countries provide aid is to get something back from these countries, for their national interest. So we have like a lot of rebuttals to this. And firstly, we say that it's not always true that they're only giving aid for their own national interest, because in the case of like natural disasters in general, they still give aid even if they don't get any tangible benefit from this. And in the poorest countries, ladies and gentlemen, where they don't have resources, they don't have any resources in these poorest countries, but these developed countries still help these poorest countries, ladies and gentlemen. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, they only prove the half of the motion, because in our model, we have talked about that we will also have like these other international organizations like the World Bank and the UNICEF, which will, ladies and gentlemen, give this aid, provide this aid to these countries without any conditions. And thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, and even if this is true, because these countries all have the incentive and because they have the capability to develop, like good example is Korea, even if they have not expected this, because they have the capability to develop in the later place, these developed countries is going to provide aid because there is a possibility that they are going to receive benefit in the long term. And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, in order for these countries to get out of poverty, they need aid. And if they get out of poverty, these developed countries have no obligation to provide aid anymore. And that's why it's going to be beneficial for their own national interest that they have considered. And that's why they have to provide aid. And fourthly, ladies and gentlemen, disregarding all this, developed countries have this obligation, these first world countries have this obligation to help the developing countries because they have exploited these developing countries in the past. And that's why today our motion stands in today's debate. And secondly, we have talked about why will our policy work. So the opposition team have been talking about how the social perception will never change because these countries will think this as a religious sin, and the men will not easily give up their social status, their high social status. However, we say that in order to change this, there is no other method than the foreign aid because these countries are really poor and they have no other option than to survive from this aid, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why they have no incentive to not change this social perception, and that's how we can change this because their first priority and their first incentive is to survive, and in order to do that they need this foreign aid, and that's why they have to change their social norm and change their social perception, ladies and gentlemen. And they have actually acknowledged that this is a problem that the women don't have right in the current status quo. They have actually acknowledged this as a problem, Mr. and Madam Speaker. However, they have never given us a solution how they will solve this, ladies and gentlemen. What is the opposition going to do to solve this problem of women right in the current status quo? And secondly, ladies and gentlemen, they've talked about the countries like China and Russia. They will have no more reason to intervene. And again, they're only proving half of the motion, ladies and gentlemen, because we have talked about how these developing countries can also receive aid from the international organizations such as UNICEF, who gives foreign aid without any conditions to these countries. And this point was totally ignored by the opposition team. And that's why we believe that our policy will work, because the foreign aid is the only method that we can change the perception, the social perception of this really strong social norm of these developing countries, that the women or women are really inferior to men. But the only method we can change this is the foreign aid, ladies and gentlemen. And thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, the third question was, why should women's education be prioritized in these countries? So they have been talking about how we should give money for infrastructure, and it's going to naturally, the women's right is going to just magically develop if we give money for infrastructure. Firstly, we say that this is not true because if they said the social norm is so strong in the current status quo in the developing countries, ladies and gentlemen, it's not going to work because the social norm is so predominant. The woman's right cannot be maintained in their policy because they said the social norm is so predominant, and just because the infrastructure has developed, it does not mean that these women's right is suddenly going to be gotten. Yes.
We've already told you in our case that economic development naturally leads to better rights, and you're not supporting any economic development because you're taking away money from that that would be put into infrastructure.
Then we have talked about these international organizations who also give aid, ladies and gentlemen, that also give aid without conditions, and these countries can actually get this money from these people, and this money that they get from after getting these women's right, after providing this women's right, this aid that they have given, they can actually spend this money for infrastructure or other necessary things that they do. And now to go on to our class, they have talked about how there are other priorities like disease or they lack in food. However, ladies and gentlemen, this is humanitarian aid, not development aid, and that this is totally different because we're still going to give this humanitarian aid for these people in order for them to survive and give the aid for medicines and diseases. We're still going to give this aid because this is humanitarian aid. And what we have mentioned, what we have talked about in our case is that education is fundamental, rather than building roads. Education is the basis of everything. And in the long term, the illiterate society will prosper more than the other countries who have no education of women. So example is Korea, how they poured the money into the education educational system, and they have developed because of the benefits that we have mentioned in our policy, how we can have productive labor force, and that's why we believe that women's education should be prioritized in today's policy, because education is the most fundamental thing that these developing countries need. And since we have proved to you that our policy will work, and how these countries has no option but to provide aid to these developing countries, and third, why women's rights should be education should be prioritized, we take this debate home.
Now I'd like to welcome the opposition whip to the podium.
Madam Speaker, we the opposition side clearly told you from the first beginning of the speech that they should actually prove to us why girls matter. The girls' problem is the most important factor to actually develop country. But actually, we believe that they failed to prove that burden. We believe that in this cases they actually failed to prove that burden, which is a very important thing that they actually prove. We believe that they cannot take this debate anyhow. And concerning this point, we said that we believe that we should actually debate under the premise that we should actually make a better society and benefit our society, especially for developing nations who are actually getting developing aids. But what the governments that are doing is that they're actually solving different problems that is not really needed for those kind of developing countries. What the actually developing country needs is not about education. Because, ladies and gentlemen, they're dying every day. Like, many people are dying even in this moment. We believe that what they really need is not about education that teach math or English. We believe that what they really need is the money that can actually they can buy water fountain, and they can actually buy water, and they can actually buy clothes, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that in this case, they do not have clothing, they do not have water, and do not have anything that they can actually sustain their life. We believe that education is unnecessary in this point. Concerning this point, I want to directly go to my first clashes. First, is it necessary? What the government side are doing is that because it's the best way to make a better society. But ladies and gentlemen, we believe that that's not the case. As I proved to you in the beginning of my speech, we clearly proved to you that it isn't the best way. And even if that's the best way, we believe that that is not something we should prioritize in this step. We believe that what they really need is not the education, but to subsidize them in a better way so that they can actually fulfill the condition of living, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that because they didn't actually clearly prove to us why there is a justification to actually have this policy, we believe that they actually failed in this debate. And also, we clearly told to you that in giving developing aid and getting developing aid, we need some justification because, ladies and gentlemen, following by their logic, developed country will actually get violated their right, because, ladies and gentlemen, they can give their developing aid when they want. We believe that in these cases they do not have any justification that prove to us that why it is justified for those kind of developed countries to actually can be violated their right to give developing aid to who they want. We believe that in these cases, because they do not have full justification, why we can able to first violate the right of the country who are giving developing aid. Also, second, they failed to prove why is it the best way to prove all the problem that is in that society. We believe that they actually failed to prove. No, thank you. But what we clearly proved to you is that nations can actually pursue their own national benefit. We clearly proved to you that that's the reason why developed country can actually give developing aids to who they want. We believe that in this cases there's no justification from the government side why we can violate their right. And going on to my second question, which is more beneficial to our citizens. What the government started talking about, there's like three factors. First, reproductive autonomy. Second, job option. Third, ethnicity. But ladies and gentlemen, we agree that that is a good thing that we can bring change. But ladies and gentlemen, we want to ask one question. Why is it the key matter to make developing countries to develop? We believe that that's not the case. As I clearly proved to you in my beginning of the speech, we clearly told you they really, what developing countries really want is not education that teach math or English. We believe that they really want the money that they can buy water, ladies and gentlemen. They're dying every day. No, thank you. And we clearly proved to you that that is not really necessary for those kind of countries. And also they talk about gender equality. Well, yes, we agree that gender equality is really important things. But ladies and gentlemen, following by their model, we believe they're worsening the gender equality. The reason why is that because for the developing country, most of the developing country actually men had more power. We believe that by having this policy, men will feel that they're actually getting violated for those kind of countries who are giving aid. We believe that in those cases, inside the country, there will be more
women would be more obsessed with it because like man is actually in the power, but actually man is obsessing more concerning women because their fear about they can actually lose their power. We believe that in this case they're even worsening the equality of the gender. We believe that in this case their argument does not sense. No, thank you. And concerning our point, we clearly told you that it will make the situation worse. We talk about the example of China and Russia, that there's a two purpose of giving international developing aid. We told you that first is about to increase international influence, and second is to gain the resources. And especially concerning China and Russia, we told you that China is actually abusing the system and they're actually making those kind of countries struggle. We believe that in these cases, they need to prove to us how people will not go to China and who will not go to China to get developing aid. And what the only argument that they bring to in this debate was that organizations, World Bank, international organizations. But ladies and gentlemen, we believe that they're actually making contradiction by themselves. First, they told us that if without female education, it's like unnecessary like funding, and also they told us that female education is the best way. That making organization or like international organization and World Bank to actually allow them to fund for like unnecessary purpose. We believe that they're actually making contradiction because organization and World Bank, following by their logic, they're making unnecessary funding. We believe that in second point, what they really need is water and fountain infrastructure. But ladies and gentlemen, as you know, World Bank do not have as much as money as US does and as much as money that the South Korean government does. We believe that in this case, they are not able to provide infrastructure for those countries which they really need. And also we told you that organization and World Bank cannot actually subsidize the whole point that concerned the infrastructure. And we clearly told you that especially China, they're killing people from Tibet. We believe that in this case it is not justified for those kind of countries to actually kill those kind of people. But what this current status quo is that people who do not able to get developing aid from other countries, they go to China, ladies and gentlemen. Because they're going to China, they're abused by China. And because of that, there are many citizens dying because of China. And also we believe that Chinese companies are actually abusing the system and they're actually making the situation worse. We believe that in this case, human right is violated as well. We believe that in this case, they're bringing more harms. And because of these two reasons, we strongly believe that we should do not have this policy. Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome the opposition reply to the podium.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we see a team proposition who's basically just ignoring human rights dying out every day, saying that female education is the best way to solve this immediate death that is occurring in the status quo. They say that these will bring numerous benefits, but ladies and gentlemen, they never solve the current problem, the most shortcoming problem that is in the status quo, which is that people are dying every day. What we need is not female education, but rather a short-term development that is able to bring them water and safe food, ladies and gentlemen. And they said how these kinds of building water fountains is humanitarian aid, but ladies and gentlemen, building in itself means that it's development. It means that you develop further with technology. So we believe that they actually do not understand their own model. So today's debate can be summarized into two parts. Is it justifiable to force a condition? Second, which will bring the better results, and will it actually occur? So in the first part, we tell you that their justification was that it's the best way to develop. And as a matter of fact, we question whether it is the best way to develop. So in what is it a best way? We tell you that 6 years of historic class or math class is not what they need. They need 6 minutes of sex education with condoms. That's what they need, ladies and gentlemen. If they think STD is the most biggest problem, then of course what we need is these kinds of immediate approach to the problem that is existing in the status quo. And second of all, even if it is the best way, we should respect the sovereign rights of every nation. That's what we told you from the very start to the end. We told you that every nation, because it's each nation who's giving them money, have the right to actually promote their own benefit and their own national interest that they have as a sovereign nation. We told you that enforcing some kind of a condition can never be justified because it actually is harming against the nation's self-benefit. So also we believe that condition is, as a matter of fact, not justified because they're actually saying that the national sovereignty of each nation to promote their own benefit, to promote their own interest is flawed. Also the fact that we told you how every nation has different interests in terms of what is the most pressing issue. Some may think that it's water, some may think it's food, some may think it is female education. We believe that we tell you that we should respect all these kinds of choices that every nation have, not just simply enforce some kind of condition that all nations do not agree upon, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, we move on to the second idea, which is which will bring the better results, and will it actually occur? Now, ladies and gentlemen, we told you that people are dying out every day because they don't have water or they don't have food. And they say that female education can magically solve this matter. And also they told us how World Bank and UNICEF gives money and that this is humanitarian aid. But, ladies and gentlemen, they need to understand the structure of international organizations. UNICEF and World Bank is run by the country's money. They give money to the international organizations, and that is how we invest. So it is basically saying that countries cannot give money, cannot actually invest on what they want in terms of these kinds of aids, but the international organization, which is consisted of countries, can actually do what they want in terms of humanitarian aid. So in itself, we believe is a very wrong model and a contradiction. So we believe that what we need is not just simply to say that international organizations or what these kinds of things will actually solve the problem. So also the fact that we believe that the change will not occur. There's no incentive whatsoever for men who are the rulers and the leaders of the society, who have authority, who have power, to actually give up all these advantages that they already had in the status quo and say that women, yes, you guys have to have rights. We believe that it will not happen in any cases. Say you're the one who have all the benefits, then would you like to give it up simply because you think that women's rights is the right thing? No, every people have the right and actually the want to pursue their own benefit. That's why we believe that there's no incentive whatsoever that they argue for. So what we've told you is that this will not occur. And secondly, the fact that we actually told you how every nation has the right to pursue their own interests and invest on what they think is the most pressing issue. That the fact that they're just simply saying that every country should talk only about female education, but that is not what we should try to do. We should actually try to solve, number one, the shortcoming problems that are existing in society, like people dying out every day, children being abused. These kinds of problems should be tackled first, ladies and gentlemen. Female education does not save any life. Female education does not provide any food and money and water to these people. So we believe that in order for you to talk about these kinds of shortcoming problems, in order for you to save more human lives, in order for you to promote social justice, is it right for you to actually vote for the team opposition. Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome our last speaker, the government reply to the podium.
Mr. and Madam Speakers, today the opposition wave came out and said that developed countries, what they need is not education. But what about statement, Madam and Mr. Speakers? I guess, we team up governments believe that they didn't listen to our model because we already stated that we're giving this aid to poor countries that independently strives to improve women's rates of education. So we think that was a big a false statement. So before going on to any of our points, I'd like to prove two main burdens that was not proven. First of all, they had to prove how they will prove they will guarantee the national benefits. But second of all, they could never protect the woman discrimination issues and women rights in today's debate. That's why they failed to stand. Well, today, my first point is that who gets the more incentives. Mr. Speaker, today team opposition stated that if the countries giving the aid, if there's no incentive for them to gain, say that they won't give aid. However, Mr. Speaker, we would like to state that first of all, this is not always the case because not all countries will only give aid for their own benefits. But second of all, we say that developed countries will give aid since in a long term they will somehow give benefits once a country that received the aid develops. Not only this, but we say that we are doing this for the poor countries' development of women development too. So we also want to state that second big point is that team government's policy, that our policy gives a better development of the country. Mr. and Madam Speakers, first of all, we need to acknowledge the fact that education should be the basis of women development and also nation, which actually leads to nation development. And we say that they also ignored our point about future aid, and we would like them to acknowledge that point. Well, not only this, but one big point we like to make in this point is that, Mr. Speaker, we say that country development is created by education, but we say that we are providing the basic humanitarian aid, which actually solves people dying, which they say as a big problem. We are providing the basic aid for people to actually live. But what we will additionally do is that we will give development aid under a certain condition under this model. So we say that they actually never engaged to this point until the reply speaker, even if the reply couldn't. So lastly, going on to my last point about who's doing a better job under this motion. Well, Mr. Speaker, we think government would like to we think government would like to solve poverty issues and also solve the issues surrounding women discrimination. We say that team opposition totally ignored the innate benefits that these countries can gain in order for their own development. We say that it is first of all beneficial, Mr. Speaker, because first of all we believe that almost every single people in the whole country can participate, and which actually because there are more jobs, Mr. Speaker. We say that is actually helpful for the natural incentives. But second of all, we say that this solves poverty issues within the whole family, and also we say within the whole family it can solve money issues. And lastly, say that the biggest point that opposition could not rebut in today's debate was the STD problems. We say that they had no engagement, and we had needed response. And we also clearly stated that under our policy, we can first of all protect protect a woman from exposing their STDs. So, Mr. Speaker, we said that in today's debate, first of all, they never proved how they will solve the woman discrimination. They stated in the DLO speech stated that woman discrimination is harmful, and then the whip speaker came out and said that woman discrimination is okay. We say that this is a cave ship. But first of all, we require them for clarifying their stance, and second of all, they need to prove how they're going to solve the woman discrimination problems. But second of all, we say that we would like to point out one issue about China, Mr. Speaker. Say that we will have to respond to their point about China. Mr. Speaker, China's abuse problem cannot be solved simply just because we don't implement our policy. We say that this was also a problem-solution mismatch. Well, under these policies, we believe that reaching government while protecting the national development and the human rights of women, we say that team opposition failed to do it and did not engage to many of our points. That's why we're proud to propose.
This is the end of the grand finals. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me congratulating them on finishing the debate so successfully with another big round of applause. Speakers may now cross the floor and shake hands. Thank you very much for your outstanding efforts, and I'm really proud of you, and I will look forward to seeing all of you to become the future leader of Korea and the world. Thank you very much.